Have you ever caught yourself thinking, I've had this experience and I know what to do, so why doesn't this person listen to me? Whether it's your prospects, your team members, or even your own kids, that urge to want to jump in and help with solutions often backfires. Why? Because people innately want to find their own way. Think about this. Let's pretend you're going to hire a performance coach and you interview 3 individuals. Pricing is relatively the same. Which one would you gravitate toward? The one who was the smartest, had all the answers, the one who was trying to impress you with all their experience, or the one who took the time to understand you and invested in learning about your experiences? In part 2 of our conversation, MJ Insurance Chief Growth Officer and President of Benefits Consulting, Andy Vetor, reveals why the hardest leadership skill isn't knowing the answers. It's having the discipline to hold back and ask better questions. Through real examples from sales, leadership, and parenting, Andy demonstrates how letting go of his need to be right is what helps him get it right. It's rarely about telling people what to do. It's about asking them questions to reflect on the accuracy or productivity of what they are doing. It's helping people reflect on their intent, actions, and efforts. Let's get rolling. I think for our listeners, and Andy, you and I talked about this the other day too, even like as being a dad, right? A parent. And for our listeners, what it is that when you have that temptation, I think, to express your opinion or to make the recommendation, right? Whether it's a prospect or your kids or a friend, it's the ability just to slow yourself down and go, hold on. Let me find out a little bit more here. I have the answers to the test. And I do this all the time with my kids. It's like, I have the answers to the test. Why don't you guys listen to me, right? And I know why they don't listen to me for many reasons, but for one of them is I am guilty of being attached to their experiences. I'm guilty of being attached to them having a good experience or making the right decision. And so I leap in right away with, hey, have you thought of, you need to be doing this? Or I might even say, look, when I was your age, I got it. I experienced A, B, and C. And so here's what I would do. And sure enough, depending on the child I'm talking to, there is a strong likelihood they're not going to listen to me. They're going to do the exact opposite of what I've said.
Yeah. Sometimes prospects do the same thing.
Right.
There's no doubt. It's much harder as a parent of 2 kids. It is definitely much harder to be patient and to go through, but it's the same conversation. It's seeking to understand from them as well. Like, what is their perspective on these things? And we all want to protect our kids from making mistakes, and I think it's the same. And it's with our kids. It's within my role now. It's with our producer group that we have there. You want to protect them from making mistakes too. But I think we all have to probably recognize that it's all about the framing of those mistakes. Like if you define failure as failure, which seems weird because I'm defining it with the same word, then yeah, that's a problem. But if you define failure as a learning opportunity, and that means that, hey, sometimes they need to go out and just make the mistake. Yeah, they're not going to listen to me. And me giving them the answers to the test isn't necessarily in their best interest. And it's the same thing with a prospect. I now own all of that. My kid doesn't own it. My prospect doesn't own it. The person in the young person in our organization that's developing their business, they don't own it because I just told them what to do. And they're just going to go try to execute on whatever that is, maybe, or they may, and what you just said, they may just rebel and do the opposite of what that is. So I think that transfer of ownership is a really important thing that a lot of people struggle with overall. They own the solution and not their prospect or the person on their team or their child.
Yeah, I could think of an example, and I will share one as a dad. So one of our children's a really gifted athlete, and
everything from an athletic standpoint has come natural to him. And so the other day we were at a banquet for the sport that he plays. He plays football. And I don't know, I just had that moment as a dad. I'm like, he's so talented. I don't know if he's really challenged himself yet. I don't know if he's taken a risk yet. I don't know if he's really said, hey, how can I get to another level? Because the level he's already at seems to be so much greater than others. And so I thought, how am I going to do this? And it was on my mind. So we're driving home from the banquet, right? And it's just on my mind. I'm like, do I talk to him tonight? Do I let him enjoy the banquet for what it was? Or do I talk to him tonight about it because I don't want to lose this moment as a dad? So I'm going back and forth in my head going, what's the right thing to do here? But then I remembered, all right, but whatever you do, you can't tell him the observation. You know, if you do, it's going to fall on deaf ears. You've got to figure out, how do you ask him a few questions to see if he'll think about it? And then you have to detach and let it go. And I was really an important topic. So I literally just said, hey man, listen, can I ask you a question? I go, when's the last time you felt really uncomfortable about something you were doing on the field at practice? And he said, well, sometimes the blocking schemes and stuff, because he doesn't like to block. He likes to get the football and go with it, right? I go, okay. I go, but what else? And he was like trying to think. He goes, I don't know. I guess he goes, I'd have to think about it. I go, all right, can you think about it? And he's like, yeah, I'll think about it. I go, all right. So when you come to that conclusion of whatever it is, can you think about what it would be like to be better at it? And what would that take? How long would those risks last? Would they last the entire season? Would it last just maybe a couple practices? And then how good would you feel if you did improve that area? Or is it okay if you don't, but would you look back and regret it? So, I cannot say that I got it right? Only time will tell. But man, Andy, it was just one of those dad moments where I was literally like, I've just got to ask questions and just see where he takes it and just see if anything different happens.
I mean, I love that story. I mean, it reminds me of business situations too. There's always these inflection points. I mean, I think that was really good on how you recognized it, you leaned into it, but you didn't lean into it with, hey, I noticed that you're not, this may be too easy for you, and maybe you're not working hard enough, or maybe you're not challenging yourself. You didn't say that to him. You asked him a really thought-provoking question that got him to a place that hopefully it's still up to him, right, to decide whether or not he agrees with that and he wants to take some different action with that. And I think the same thing happens in a lot of prospect or client interactions, is that you get to a certain inflection point in a meeting, and it's one of those things where like, oh man, I got some solutions that I think they should really think about here, or they said something and I really want to challenge them on their thinking around that thing. And it's all about how you handle that moment. And it's almost without fail, it's who can ask the best question in that moment to make them really take the ownership, think deeply, and come back to you with, yeah, here's where my thinking is around that. That allows you to go a little bit deeper, that versus the, gosh, I want to challenge your thinking here. Here's something that I think you really need to think about.
Yeah, given the fact that he's 17, right? Yeah. I remember when I was 17, I don't know how much deep thinking I did.
Yeah, you need somebody to provoke that from you, and that's our responsibility too. That to me is our responsibility to our prospects and our clients and our internal constituents inside our firm is to challenge them on that. I know, Dan, one of the things that
go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things I know that we wanted to make sure that we talked about as I think through kind of my journey through my life cycle and at our organization, how we've grown over time. I spent a lot of my early years really focused on prospecting clients, those interactions. And as my career has evolved, I spent a lot more time in leadership. And as we were thinking about this conversation and just like the conversations that you have to have there, especially with a lot of the newer people that are joining our organization that might be in their early to mid 20s and they're just beginning their career, there's just so much they don't even know. I mean, and I don't mean just like knowledge. I just mean like of the world and they don't know what they want. It's just really hard. You want them to know that. You want that for all of them. We're going to want that for our kids. They're going to be 22 and we're going to want them to know exactly what they want. But the truth is we didn't either. We didn't at 22 go, I know exactly what my whole life is going to look like and I'm focused on this, and we want that for our kids. So I think the ability to dig deep with them too is part of what has filled my cup. That was the prospecting activity before, that is now the thing that is like, how can I go really deep and help them really understand for themselves, where do they want to go? What are the things that are the motivators for them that they may not even recognize are those motivators in the moment, because nobody has asked them the good questions to get them there. Because as we said, parents, in a lot of cases, we're not necessarily the best ones because we're so connected to the result and wanting them to be, successful and everything else, that we probably do a very poor job of asking the good questions of our kids to get them to think about where they want to take their life, their career, their future.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about that, which one, and you may not feel pressure, I don't know, but right, there is a bit of pressure when you do have that moment with a prospect that's, what to say, you got the answers to the test, but instead you kind of back off and you invest in your questions. In a way, hoping, anticipating, can the prospect get there on their own, right? Then as a parent, right, it's the same thing. Like I said, it's hard, but if you want to do it the right way where the child takes ownership, it's the same thing. You got to ask questions and kind of sit back and let time play out and say, all right, are they going to do something with this? Are they going to get there on their own? But as a leader, right? Because I know you're the president of the organization now. And as a leader, right? Is it more pressure? Do you feel like, because you're right, you got the answers to the test, Andy, right? And so when you're talking to some of your teammates and so employees and so forth, what they should be doing. How do you handle that though? Because, right, I don't know, do you feel more pressure in that instance?
So, pressure maybe feel more frustration. There's a level of like, you're right. When you know the answers to the test and you're trying to get somebody to think in that way.
Right.
It's easier for me. It's easier for me to have the empathy when I'm sitting in front of a prospect that I don't know as well in many ways, versus sitting in front of somebody on my team that I do know a little bit better. And even more so with my kids, who I know as well as I know them better than anybody else in the world, like that. Those are the things. As you get closer to it, the harder it is, I think, in some cases, to remain objective on it. So I don't know that the pressure is, if I would call it pressure, but it's a different level of like responsibility, I think, with all of them too. And at this point in my career, like I used to get an incredible high every time that I had a great prospect meeting, whether or not that resulted in a win, as people would define it. Just a great conversation was like something that would absolutely fill my cup. That still is something I enjoy. I get to do less and less of it all the time. But what I do really enjoy is when somebody, one of our team members, we're able to have a really deep interaction, challenge their thinking, get them to a place that changes their behavior because they took ownership of it, and then they go and deploy that. And watching the results take place, because that's an inflection point for them. And I know their career is about to take off because they proved it to themselves that they can do that, where they did not. Every one of these, all of them have to have the moment that says, hey, I've been listening to Andy. I've been listening to other people on the team tell me that this is the way that I need to kind of go about it. And yeah, I hear you, but I've done it this kind of way. And I kind of had a little bit of success here. And then the moment that they really have that inflection point and they go, all right, I'm going to lean into it. I'm going to do it. And they go, wait a minute, that was different. The game changed for me. and I'm going to lean into those inflection points going forward. Those are the things that are really fulfilling for me at this point, is seeing them do it, knowing that their career is going to take off as a result of it.
So it's not so much the pressure, right? It's more, can you stay patient? Because, right, you've seen it play out, right? Whether it's a producer, a dad, now a leader, right? Can you just stay patient, which makes complete sense, slow down and see if that other person can get there. So they have ownership of it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
As we're talking here, this word came up. How does humility play into all this? Now I'm springing a surprise on you on this one.
Yeah.
Because, right, you've been around a lot of successful people, right? Whether it's within your organization, whether it's outside of it, whether it's your prospects and clients, right? And then how does humility play into this as maybe as a producer and maybe even as a leader? Because one thing I'm going to say is, and I want to hear from you, but one thing I'm going to say is, I'm going to put a little context around this. I get to spend one or two, I think maybe two sessions with you guys a year. Pam keeps me away otherwise. But what I've always noticed in those sessions, you're front and center. Like, you take notes, you listen, you ask questions. I mean, it's almost like, you're the one you've kind of proven yourself the most in the entire room, but you're also the one that's there and you're ready and you are engaged. So tell me a little bit about that. How does that humility play out?
Well, yeah, great question, Dan. Look, I want to get better. You know what I mean? Like, there's nobody gets to a place in their career and they're like, I solved it all. The world is evolving every day. It moves faster and faster all the time. And if I just sit there and go, well, I got it figured out, that the world's going to pass me by, right? So I have my own level of I don't know, skepticism, whatever it is. I want to continue that. I need to continue to learn, and I want to stay on top of these things. So I want to be part of it. Plus, I love it. I love the human interaction parts of this. And you use the term humility. I'm going to rephrase it a little bit and call it vulnerability. Like, so for me, that's how I define it. And that's also part of my mindset. Like, how am I going to help? I have to show up as being really vulnerable. That means I have to sometimes I got to be willing to ask a stupid question, or what might be perceived to be a stupid question. And I would tell you, sometimes I do ask it, and it is a stupid question. But there's sometimes I ask it, and it's there's sometimes I ask it, and it is like, oh, that's a really, you get the prospect or the associate on our team look at you and go, wow, that's a really insightful question. I'm going to get, and it starts to unlock something for people. So just being willing to mess it up, I think is really important, and being vulnerable in that room. And again, I have to subvert myself, my ego, my need for success or an outcome. If that is in my mind when I walk into that meeting, I am not going to perform at my best. It has to be about them. Full stop. It has to be about them and whatever their success is. That might sometimes mean, though, that I do need to lean into challenging somebody, because there's times that you have people that are just they're blind to a certain thing, and you have to have the ability to call that out. But you have to do that that's where the humility part, I think, really comes in, is at the tactical level of, how do I make sure I ask this question in a way that I'm not stepping on this person, or I'm making them feel judged or critiqued, or because I really believe they're probably going down the wrong path, but I got to make sure that I that is something for me in my career that took time, but I recognize my mind starts telling me that this is the moment, and I get this choice to either lean in, or I get this choice to back out.
Yeah, you said something that I wrote down, and anything you can share on this, right? And you said you have to be willing to mess it up. How did you learn to give yourself that permission? I mean, because you're just spot on, and you right. But how did you say to yourself, you know what, it's okay. I'm going to do this. And you must have learned real quick, right, that you're going to survive it and you're going to come out the other side.
It's so here's a few things. I had great mentors. I mean, Joe Perkins, who I call out and every time I get a chance to do it, was an unbelievable mentor. And if there was one trait, if I had one word to describe Joe, it would be humble. I mean, that is who he is. And so he gave me latitude early in my career to screw it up. Like he was willing to allow me to do that. And so that made it kind of be part of it for me. But the other thing that I recognize is there a lot of times we have people that are so worried about, I got to say the right word, the right time, in the right way. And if I don't, I'm going to miss my chance. And
so true. That's so true.
There's no perfection in that, right? There is no perfection. The perfection is a lot more, and the trust is built if you do struggle a little bit. And I don't mean artificially, like, hey, I feel like and I'm going to role play a little bit, like I feel like there's a really important question I need to ask you, but I'm feeling like this may put you in a really awkward spot. Are you okay if I ask you this question? I can now ask them almost anything I want to at that point, versus if I just jump in and I don't give any of that pretext to it, and I just jump into the question, I might have the person recoil, right? And say, gosh, I feel judged, and I'm not going to give you the truth now, right? There's a way to go about that I think is really important. And so you have to, I think, wrap yourself in vulnerability and humility, and it's got to show up to the client, because that's where the barriers go down and trust goes up. And that for me is where I know that's where the magic happens in personal relationships, period. We've talked about it in prospects from a leadership perspective, and with your family, that's where the trust really ramps up, or that's where the magic happens, is when there's real, true trust between two parties that can communicate and not know somebody's going to use something against them.
Yeah, it's so spot on. It reminds me, I think you and I have talked about this in the past, right? It's like when your child messes up and they made a mistake, but you haven't had the chance to talk to them, counsel them, right? And before you can go to them, they come to you, and it's like they say, hey, Dad, can we talk? I messed up. Right there and then, their vulnerability and their honesty just lowers all the tension. It lowers everything, right?
Right. Yeah, I haven't had my kids do that yet. They're 14 and 12, but I'm hopeful for that day, Dan. But you're right. But when you said that, it just made me think. It put me in that spot as a dad. Were that to happen, how am I going to handle that conversation versus them coming to me and going, I didn't do that. I thought what I did was fine. Like defending and protecting. I'm going to go back at them in a different way versus if they come to me and say, look, I really screwed this thing up. And I think the same is true in the way you show up with your clients and prospects.
Well, how about as a leader, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, when they know that you're willing to be vulnerable, and they know that you will be, and you will do it without anybody else's permission, right? That's got to build a ton of trust and in that moment, right? Like if you have to have a tough conversation with an associate or something, or a tough conversation with a producer, right? Right. All the same rules apply.
Yeah, no doubt. And again, I think as you move down the line, at least for me, it gets harder and harder to do those things. So you have to lean into the vulnerability and the humility even more, and be more conscious of it as you're having those leadership and parental conversations.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to go back to the statement because I know our listeners are listening and enjoying this, hopefully, but it doesn't take me long or Pam long or Christy long. We're in a room and we can tell who's really, really committed to themselves, who's committed to their craft, who's committed to becoming a very strong performer. Because they're always the ones, no matter where they are on the achievement continuum, they're engaged, they're asking questions, they're listening. And what's funny is more often than not, what I've noticed lately, it's the younger folks who are the most fearful of engaging. It's the younger folks that don't take a lot of notes. And I don't know where that stems from, but it's almost like they're afraid to admit that they don't have the answer, or that they need to get better, or they need to learn. So for our listeners, you invest in yourself. So whether you agree or disagree with whatever you're learning at a seminar or reading a book or online, debate it at least. Give yourself a chance. Use your curiosity and debate it. No one's signing an agreement, right? Just experiment with it. Give yourself a chance. As we conclude part 2 with our conversation with Andy Vetor, consider this. Thinking about the recent conversations you've had with family, kids or spouse, teammates, clients, and/or prospects, how much of your effort was directed toward telling the other person your opinion or perspective? Remember, it's not that your perspective is wrong, but does it land? When you mean well and you slip into telling and demonstrating mode, watch how the other person responds. Do they listen to qualify or disqualify what you're sharing? If you're honest with yourself, most will spend their energy disqualifying, not because you're wrong, but because they simply weren't ready to receive it. Moving forward, take a step back and think about the questions you can ask the other person. Can you get them reflecting on how they ended up in this current spot, and how or why they see their current attitude and actions playing out? Help them find their path. This small adjustment has helped me as a parent, husband, teammate, and advisor to my clients. It will help you as well.